the long course is done, and then now is MARSOC completely stood up at this point? Like, are you working in and out of MARSOC spaces, and what was it like to stand that up? We when we do task orgs and we have like reorganizations inside of ASOC, sometimes a flight, like a new flight structure, will like completely just kill everybody. They're like, what are we supposed to be doing? Gosh. Who am I talking to? What am I doing? I imagine setting up an entire command, or what is it, a brigade level for you guys? That has to be a huge move.
It was interesting because when I was at First Force, our aid station was still 3 or 4 barracks rooms like linked together. That was how we lived. I can't tell you how many. They say don't do barracks medicine, right? I'm like, our aid station is barracks. What do you want?
Yeah.
Right. And so when we came back, we were 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion on the West Coast, and the East Coast is where the Death Star was. So 2nd and 3rd Marine Special Operations Battalion were over there, and they had actually built a like a big building. That's what we called the Death Star. So I moved over there, and that was very new and unique to me because you've got this massive building, super nice. I mean, beautiful. And all the people that are running around in there that came from all walks of life. Because MARSOC was stood up on the backs of the reconnaissance community. And the reconnaissance community kind of suffered to some degree, especially on the corpsman side for it, because we were already undermanned. And then this big thing stood up with the same requirement for the SARCs, for the medical people, but it more than doubled. I think it almost tripled. And we barely had enough to cover the recon units. So it was a hot mess. And the one thing I will say about the Marines with the medical stuff is, and my dad complained about it, and I'm sure the people before him complained about it, and I'm sure people 20 years from now, the Marines, when they plan, even though we've been with them forever, they're always like building all their plans, and then the lone sailor in the room will raise their hand and be like, hey, what about the corpsman? They're like, oh man, we forgot about that. And that's what happened with the MARSOC. And we even got proactive and tried to build something to send to them, like, this is what's going to be needed. And so we were way behind the power curve medically with personnel, just because it's a 2.5-year pipeline. You can't just like pop them out. And the schools can only handle so much. I mean, it was a hot mess. And still to this day, it's getting better. But it was a lot.
So what is the people are 100% interested. We get this all the time, and a lot of times we try to just defer, be like, hey, it's kind of not our lane or whatever. But what is the actual pipeline? I think you guys are going by SIDC now. Is that the entire overarching name for? Yeah,
Special Operations Independent Duty Corpsman. And it's, if you have not been to Field Med, so you go to boot camp, core school, and then core school, and then Field Med. Field Med is the Field Medical Training Battalion. It's basic, trauma, TTRIC, and basic Marine Corps stuff, like learning to, not call the gunny big sarge and recognize rank and stuff like that. Things that will get your head bitten off. And then just how to live in the field with the Marines. That's where all the conventional folks go. So that's technically the first school, though most people have already been to it. And then after that, you go to BRC, which is now only in Pendleton, and it's basic reconnaissance course. That's, I think it's 3.5 months now. And it's all the land warfare and communications. They do some shooting and a lot of amphib stuff, but not subsurface. So it's all, scout swimming, working with Zodiacs, over the horizon, navigation, nautical navigation, all that stuff. And then you go to Marine Combatant Dive School, which is our combat dive school. It's, I think, 2.5 months also, something like that, 3 months. And that's same as every other combat dive school, right? In fact, it's all the same. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Navy is the one who puts out the standards for all dive schools, which makes sense, right? I mean, it's the Navy.
Yep.
So you go to that. And then after that is I think it's a 3-week course that's just medicine specific. And that's where the corpsmen get all the hyperbaric medicine stuff. You go to jump school. I think SEER school is included now as well. It was not when I was going through, but I think that's a part of it as well. Free fall is later if you go. It's team funded, but that's it. Oh, and of course, 18 Delta. kind of forgot that one. So that's where that whole like 2.5 years comes in, because that school just by itself is a year. And that's a big change just in the last couple of years. The Navy sees IDCs, you have to be an E5 or above. Well, we're now trying to recruit street to fleet. So it's impossible to have somebody as an E5 if you've recruited them off the street. And I was a part of this. We had a couple of people coming through that we sent as E4s. And then what we did was we built kind of this mentor program for them, so that if you're an E4, no kidding, IDC, when you're in garrison, you're practicing with a mentor IDC. And when you go downrange, it's a free game. You can do, unsupervised, right? But we would do that until they would make E5. That kind of like satisfied the Navy. But now that's become a program of record, so they can go through street to fleet. So you might get an IDC out of the program that's still, most of them will be E4 just because of meritorious promotion or whatever after graduating the school. But I've actually seen one E3 get all the way through.
Did you guys have any growing pains with the street to fleet thing? Because I know, we, at least in the Air Force, we have always kind of had the street to fleet. We have a lot of cross trainees and sister service as well, which helps. But, to go to SEALs, you used to have another job, and then you go to that. And then they started the 18 X-ray program for the 18 series guys. I think that was 2005. Don't quote me on that. The ODA dudes out there, but, and there were some growing pains because, they had this culture of, they were already well established, folks that had been in the Army, Navy for a long time. And then now you got these kids that think that, whether or not they think they're entitled to it or not, but it's just, there was definitely a cultural shift, for them. Did you guys experience the same
They
kind of thing?
are experiencing it. Not yet. So they're deep in the throes of it. And
They're still doing it.
Here's the other thing. The Navy and the Marines so at least you can say, well, it's the Air Force's problem. The thing that we faced from a behind the curtain, behind the scenes type of problem, and it's still there, is who's paying for all this? The Marines say the Navy should pay for it because they're sailors. The sailors, the Navy says the Marines should pay for stuff because you're getting them. And it's constant. It's like being the unwanted child of divorced parents who hate each other sometimes. I mean, it gets crazy. And then, so yes, that's a part of it. I feel like our screening process is pretty good as far as getting people, good quality people through the SARCs, SOIDCs, whatever that are coming out. I think are just, I'm one of these guys. So I hate hearing people say, oh, it's, I used to go to school uphill both ways in the snow, barefoot, like every generation brings something different. And I can say that, yes, as an instructor at BRC, there was objective data that the young folks coming in were not as most, and I'm generalizing, were not as strong and fast as my generation. Mm-hmm. They had the same desire, but I think it's because a lot of them didn't grow up where I was not allowed to come in the house during the day. My dad put a water fountain on the spigot outside, and that's where I got a drink. Right? And so I grew up.
Hose.
Yes. Oh, no, we got fancy. He found like an actual little water fountain that went where the hose goes. And so, I've said this before on air, I think that you've got the same mentality in young people where they're playing war just like we did. But our version of war was shooting each other in the face with BB guns or slingshots or throwing rocks at each other outside running around. And theirs is predominantly online. And it gives them the advantage when I remember when drones first came in and I was like, whoa, right? And these young people are just flying them around like it's second nature. It would have taken me a 2-week class to learn to fly that stupid thing. I'd probably still crash it. So they're very up and attuned to all of that. Whereas my generation was, I've got calluses on my knuckles because I drag them around, right? Like you put something on my heavy on my back. And even when I first came in, I could already carry it, because I've been used to doing that. So the mentality is there. It's just a physicality that is a little different. Of course, folks that play sports in school tend to do better because, they're used to that physicality. But that's the biggest difference, I think, in the young folks coming in nowadays. It's not the mindset. It's just like, oh, hey, this. And I literally heard young Marines, never sailors, But I heard a couple young Marines when I was at BRC say it didn't look this hard in the video games.